Hi, everybody. My name is Sabine Nouvet. I'm the Rainforest Advisor for Wales for Plantlife. And I'm Canadian, French Canadian, and doing siarad Gymraeg hefyd. Ond heno, Saesneg yw iaith. We're going to speak in English tonight. But that's me 20 years in the rainforest zone of Eryri of Wales, and I'm now speaking Welsh. Tonight, I'm going to give you a very different talk to what Gordon presented, and that's mainly because I admit I didn't have much time to prepare because I've been out in the field, and so I've collated a whole bunch of photos, and my main objective for tonight is to give you like a quick overview of what's going on in Wales, which is a much smaller scale kind of story than what's happening up in Gordon's world in Scotland. And then I'm going to tell you a story, which is exemplar or an example of the kind of work that I'm doing and the kind of work that's happening between organizations in the rainforest zone of Wales. So that's my summary, which I was supposed to give you. And here we go. I'm just moving these, like the view, so I can see what you're seeing. There, okay. So first of all, just give you a quick overview of the kind of rainforest initiatives that are happening in Wales. And we've been following in the tracks of the Scottish Rainforest Alliance and have finally formed an alliance for Wales's rainforests. Its first report, The State of Wales's Rainforest, was published in the autumn, this last autumn. So that's in its infancy, and the whole purpose of that is advocacy, policy influencing, and coordinating across the nation. On the ground kind of work has been spearheaded by the Life Celtic Rainforest project, which started in 2018 and is running till 2027. Then there's the Eryri Rainforest Partnership, and this is the first landscape scale direct action kind of partnership that's happening on the ground, not funded externally, such as the Life Celtic Rainforest Project. There's also ancient woodland surveys and inventories happening, especially in Eryri Rainforest Partnership. And finally, there's a Resilient Welsh Rainforests project, which funds my role for the first 2 years of my position. Sorry, now it doesn't want to try that. There we go. So State of Wales's Rainforest Report was published in 2024. It's available online. I'll urge you to go look. It has a wonderful, like comprehensive inventory and assessment of the condition of the rainforests in Wales. As you can imagine, not so good. Less than 50% of our woodlands in Wales, designated woodlands, have even been surveyed and assessed in condition. And of those, only 20% of the woodlands that have been assessed are in favorable condition. So we've got serious problems, as we know, across the United Kingdom. The report also outlines ways forward and actions, which are starting to happen in local partnership groups. The Life Celtic Rainforest Project, funded by the EU, it's a very big pot of money, 9,500 euros, 9,500,000 euros, and it was extended until 2027 because of COVID. The focus of this project is on 5 SACs in Wales, which are designated because of their rainforest feature. And as Gordon outlined, the designation doesn't refer to a rainforest per se, but these are the Atlantic oak woods. So 5 SACs ranging from North Wales down to Mid Wales. And most of the money is being spent on rhododendron eradication. However, there's also some money spent in pause restoration, plantation on ancient woodland sites, as well as conservation grazing, because some sites are undergrazed or overgrazed. It's a partnership project with RSPB and Woodland Trust involved heavily, but it's led by the Eryri National Park. Well, that cursor doesn't work. There we go. Now, this is the Eryri Rainforest Partnership is a burgeoning initiative, and because of that, it's hasn't got much to say for itself. But what is exciting is that it finally is an example of a local landscape scale partnership. So it was started last year, initiated by the RSPB, who invested in hiring a conservation officer to cover the core rainforest area in North Wales, Meirionydd Oak Woods. And the conservation officer I was actually that person, and I was tasked with creating this partnership. We thought we were going to focus on just one catchment, one really important rainforest catchment in North Wales. But organizations involved were so keen and argued so eloquently that the partnership grew and is now to cover all of the Eryri Rainforest zone. As you can see, the usual suspects of conservation organizations, as well as a few like community enterprises, and from this, subgroups have formed. For example, a working group of foresters from conservation bodies, as well as forestry companies such as Till Hill and NRW, who meet once a month or about 6 times a year to visit each other's pause woodlands. And so the hosting forester will show the woodland to all of the other foresters and go, these are my problems. This is how I've dealt with it. What would you guys do? And it's been really, really good at building bridges between the polarized groups, foresters and conservationists, for example, to have commercial foresters listening and respecting what the woodland advisors in Woodland Trust, for example, have to say, and vice versa. It's also been an eye-opening experience for a lot of the woodland managers to understand the complexity of forestry within the legislative framework. So instead of just slagging off foresters, there's this dawning awareness that actually it is more complicated than we think, and maybe we should work together. So that's an exciting new partnership, and the next step is to submit an application for funding to work on one of the catchments within the national park area and promote landscape scale management across each other's boundaries. There's also ancient woodland management being funded. In terms of the rainforest work, most of that is being funded by the Eryri National Park because that's where the most extensive amount of rainforest is. I'm not aware, in fact, of direct rainforest work happening in other national parks in Wales. And this includes lots of funding, long-term funding that they keep on tapping into to allow for ancient woodland assessments, restoration programs, and projects. Finally, there's the Resilient Welsh Rainforest Project, which Plantlife was able to secure. That enabled Plantlife to create my post, which is the Rainforest Advisor for Wales. And they did this. It was a great moment last year because Plantlife was all of a sudden able to form or create a rainforest team across the UK. So Georgie in Cumbria is my equivalent. She's funded by Plantlife and by a different project. There's Angie Cruz down in Devon and Cornwall, and Oliver up in Scotland, who's been in post for a few years already. Now, my role is permanent, and Plantlife is committed to having a permanent rainforest team now across the UK. But for the first 2 years, my funding, the funding that they received, outlines these actions, such as rainforest surveys and management advice, specialist surveys. That means either conducting them myself or contracting those out. Translation of the Rainforest ID guides and management guides. Now, this is important because in Wales, the language is very strong, and we're committed to providing all of our resources bilingually. So it's a big, expensive move for Plantlife as a relatively small charity to invest in translating, and also to be able to provide some of the workshops in Welsh. So that's something that, sadly, I'm not completely fluent in Welsh, but I definitely champion it as much as I can. And then training, lots of training, including the rapid rainforest assessment and bespoke training, which I will refer to towards the end of this presentation. So we do have an excellent Managing Temperate Rainforest toolkit on the Plantlife website. If you haven't come across it, I'd urge you to. You could spend a day reading all of the different resources and links that it provides, from case studies, including the rhododendron work, and halo thinning and ash dieback sort of advice, as well as ID training and guides. Now we get to the fun bit, or the sad bit. This is a bit where there's very little text, and I get to tell you a story which has struck me and taken up a lot of my time, including this last week. So you all have, probably most of you have memories of Storm Dara in December. And Storm Dara hit North Wales really hard. And for a couple of weeks afterwards, I spent a lot of time visiting the top rainforest valleys here in Eryri, just to assess the scale of the damage. The photo you can see here is this is the foothill of Yr of Snowdon. So Snowdon's actually behind it, out of sight. And you can see a ash woodland on the Ffrith, on the middle ground, on the slope. And you can just about see the damage of that ash woodland. Here's a closer view. I went into that woodland because that block of trees, in fact, on those boulders, is a very rare lichen, which might even impress Gordon, a series of Pseudocephalaria norvegica and intricata, growing on those boulders. And so I went with the photos which were taken of those populations in 2015. And I wanted to repeat them to see how the populations were doing. But this is what I came to. And sadly or luckily, the lichens are now limited mostly on the alkaline base-rich rocks below the trees, just because of the long history of deforestation and acid rain. So their last refuge is on the boulders, and they still they're still growing even after the storm. But I was in that block, which is in the center of the photo you're looking at, and I counted above the footpath which runs along the bottom of the block. I counted 46 trees standing and 22 trees fallen, blown over. So almost half the trees had been blown over just in that storm. And this is the kind of site that I was seeing along the valley. And what was so strange about Storm Dara was that you would get bursts of anger from the storm that would just wipe out a block of trees and then move on. It was one of the RSPB wardens described it as a storm that had a lot of temper tantrums and would just explode every once in a while. So here's the impact. And I was surveying because these are mostly designated woodlands with the rainforest, the lower plant assemblage as the feature. And I just thought I should take a few days to walk around and assess where the damage is and what the extent is on these lichen and bryophyte hotspots are, so that I could liaise with the landowners. I have to admit, it kind of became this accumulative, really upsetting 2 weeks, because wherever I went, there were huge trees, or there was just extensive trees, native trees, non-native conifers, but everything had just been wiped. This is definitely an event, a very rare storm event, but one which our fragmented rainforests can't tolerate too frequently. We've lost, in one woodland block, we lost almost half the trees. So because we don't have that much woodland left, this event was catastrophic, and we're still dealing with that. So there it is. It's a huge landscape scale, whole valleys wiped out in the way that you saw in that first photo, patches of woodland blocks completely smashed, broken. And then so that was upsetting. And I kept on going, visiting new sites, and then I got a phone call from one of the site managers for the Woodland Trust, and he said to me, "Oh, Sabine, you know the Coed Velyn NNR, National Nature Reserve, and it has a cluster of really old, beautiful oaks at the entrance." And he says, "Sabine, that first oak at the entrance of the NNR blew over yesterday in the storm. So I've called the contractors, because it's blown over across the footpath, which is what you're looking at in this photo." And he said, I need to get them to move the tree because it's blocking the footpath. So I was actually at the other valley, the one with the matchstick woodland that I showed you in the previous photo. And I got this call, and I said, I'll go over right now. So I ran back to my car, drove 40 minutes to this next valley and to this nature reserve here. And I got to the contractors working on this tree. And the thing about this tree is that it's so big and so long, it blew over, and the crown of the tree was in the river. And across the bank, across the river, on the opposite bank, is the outflow of a massive historic hydro station. So Woodland Trust were required to clear the river, not because there was any risk to a footpath, but because of this hydro station. And because of that immediate and high risk, the contractors were working in the river, cutting off all the branches and pulling them out of the river, which is good, because I showed up and I said, "Oh, I'm from Plantlife, and there's some pretty rare lichens on this tree," and I'll get to that in a minute. Loberia community, just every kind of loberia you can imagine, as well as all sorts of crusts, and really great tree. And I said to them, what's your plan? And they go, "Well, we're clearing the river. That's a priority. And then we're scratching our heads because we've been told we have to pull the tree off of the path." Now this tree, I'm so sorry, I'm usually there by myself. I can't show you the scale, but the top of that tree's stem reaches my shoulder. If I were to stand next to it, it's huge. And the poor contractors were going, "How are we going to pull this tree?" It was so big and heavy. And I guess, the thing with storms in particular, or big events like this, which are not planned, is that we're thinking off the top of our heads. So here we have a woodland manager, Woodland Trust manager, quite new to the job, going, "Oh my God, all these ancient and veteran trees blowing over on all of his reserves." And he's just trying to manage the risk. So of course he called the contractors and he said, "Can you get to this Coed Velyn tree and just deal with the footpath, which is blocked?" And the contractors go, "Yeah, we'll do it. But the priority is get the tree out of the river because of the outflow of the hydro." So the contractors rush over and they start working in the river. And then they're like, "And then we have to pull the tree out of the way." And it takes somebody from the outside to go, "Do you really need to pull the tree off of the path? Why don't we just divert the path around the tree?" And I go, "Oh yeah, that's Yeah, we can do that. So now the path is diverted around the tree, and when you enter the reserve, you have to pay homage to this beast which has blown over. And the beast is huge. I can't say how old. The lichens growing on it suggest it's at least 300 years old. And one of the branches which was cut off near, one of those lower branches you can see in this photo was cut off later, and it was 170 years old, just the branch, about 4 meters off the ground. So this is an old tree. And so I thought, okay, well, we've got a tree. We will pay homage to it now. But there's a slight problem. This tree has some very rare lichens on it, including a little tiny one called Rhinodina isidioides. And it's not that rare compared to Gordon's, what was it called, Gordon? Fissurina aluscripta. Okay, it's not like that, but it's pretty rare. Okay, it's also a red listed, near threatened internationally. It's a Section 7 species protected by law, and it's part of that rich, a very rich community on the tree. So here's Rhinodina isidioides distribution in the UK. But what does it look like? Now, I know this isn't a photo of the tree. Well, maybe you don't know it, but I'll be honest, it's not. This is the tree along the way on the footpath. So when you enter this nature reserve, there's about 7 huge oak trees which greet you. Well, there used to be 7 plus 5. So there used to be 12 huge oak trees. This is one of the smaller ones, but the one on the left here, left of the path. But it has a good community of species. Can you guess? Have a look at that. Where do you think the Rhinodina isidioides is on that? Would you guess it's the fuzzy usnea looking things, or would you go for a smear? What would you think? Well, here's the tree fallen, and it's definitely one of the smears. It's the pale green-gray smear. And poor John, the Woodland Trust manager, I showed it to him. Interestingly, the contractors are like, oh yeah, we know this tree is really important because our boss always shows it to us. He says it's so important. It's got all these rare lichens. And they were showing me the Loberia pulmonaria, which is like sheathing all the branches. And I said, yeah, that's a really good one. But actually, we're interested in this green smear. And everybody's face kind of drops and they look at the green smear. And then you look at it under the lens, and it's a bad photo, but Rhinodina isidioides is also called skeletal fingers in English. And when you look with the lens at this very unassuming green smear, and then you look and you see these wet fingers poking out towards you, it's quite creepy and absolutely beautiful. And the amazing thing about it is that this population of green that you see on that photo, which John is looking at, is one of the, if not the best population of Rhinodina isidioides in Wales. It's also the only population of Rhinodina isidioides in this entire valley, let alone one of the very few in Eryri. So it's rare, locally extremely rare. And in the flash that it took to blow down this 300 or 400-year-old tree, it became extinct, virtually extinct in our valley. So that's species crisis. That's an emergency. And what were we going to do about it? Here's a little video. I just thought, can I show you, get you to have a bit more of a sense of what it looks like under the hand lens? Yeah, so there you can see it's just tiny, and we get close up and you see these little skeletal fingers. Right. Well, what are we going to do about it? Obviously, the first thought was this is a case for translocation. Translocation is never an ideal. You want to try to make sure the habitat is correct and favorable enough for a species to move on its own and to colonize new trees, for example. But as a last case scenario, we can try to use translocation. Nobody's ever tried to translocate, as far as I know, a lichen that grows in this form, these microscopic little fingers. We've tried crusts on sand dunes and heaths. We've tried lobelia, nice leafy stuff, but these little fingers that grow out of the bark, it's a tricky one, and it hasn't been done before. But the most immediate question was, look at this photo. The whole tree, it seems it was so big that as it blew over, the root plate must have kind of flung all of the soil that was under the root plate and flung it up and over and onto the stem of the tree and onto the Rhinodina isidioides, onto the skeletal fingers. So there was about 30 centimeters of fine silty soil on the tree trunk, smothering the Rhinodina. So the first step was to remove the soil, and there I've circled a little bit of the pale green smear. So some of it was exposed, but we spent a lot of time carefully removing as much soil as possible, and then the contractors got a pump over, and they pumped river water to gently wash off the rest of the soil. Oh, we're looking at the tree and we're going, okay, it's the middle of winter. The Rhinodina is now breathing and exposed to light again. We've got a little bit of leeway. Good thing, because I then had to submit an application to translocate this Section 7 species. So I submitted an application, statutory application, to Natural Resources Wales, and the automatic reply was, this will take 6 weeks for us to decide. We thought, oh my God, 6 weeks to wait to know if we're allowed to move the lichen. Anyways, 24 hours later, they gave us permission, which was really good. But we thought we have a little bit of time. It's the dead of winter. This lichen doesn't have much, it's not going to dry out. It's not going to be exposed to much sunlight. So we're okay. Here it is, just showing, peeking through the dirt. So the plan of action was divert the footpath and follow through with the idea of translocation. Right, that was 5th of December, let's say the 7th of December. By late, I did get the permission to start translocating, and I did start to translocate. Meanwhile, early February, 2 months later, I was still returning and trying different translocation techniques, and it was very clear that the Rhinodina was already dying. So in this photograph, you can see that the Rhinodina circled in black is quite gray. So you get this gray tinge to the bark, and the one circled in turquoise is still green. Why is it dying so quickly? None of us thought it would die that quickly. Mind you, nobody's ever documented this. So this is all new, but we all thought we'd have like the winter until the droughts of spring and summer. No, it was very surprising that it died so quickly. And here you can see as well a close-up of it and the difference in color. So the green being alive and the gray is the dying fingers. There's a nice green example of it still alive. And why is it dying? I think it was the frost. So this is a view of the tree trunk in February, covered in heavy frost, and the side of the trunk wasn't. So the main part of the population just so happened to have fallen. The tree fell with the main population now facing the sky and also facing all of the elements, including the heavy frost, which it would have never been subjected to when the tree was standing. So I think that's what's happened. And now all of the Rhinodina on the top of the tree of the main population is dead. And if I went this week or last week, and there were still some remnants of living lichen on the sides of this tree. So meanwhile, we started doing the translocation, and we thought, because nobody's ever translocated this kind of a species, we'll trial a few different methods. So we applied for consent, and we trialed 4 methods: tapling, rubbing, gauze, and super glue. High-tech stuff. To translocate requires finding host trees, which can take the donor samples. And because I'm not sure if this is the right way, and I think that I would like to see this change in the future, but with time pressure as well, we were limited to choosing only trees within the same nature reserve. Um, and the only suitable trees, and to know if a tree is suitable, you look at the lichen community growing on the donor tree. And then you look at similar trees in the similar position, and you look at their lichen community. And because the lichens are always telling us stories about, how hot it gets in the summer, how windy it is, how humid it is year round. Each of these lichen species are so specific and so sensitive that they're telling us that story. And therefore you can identify quite a few veteran or ancient oaks in the area and start surveying them and looking, okay, what else is growing on these? Are they the same communities as we saw in the donor tree? And we only found 5 trees in this reserve which had the similar community, which suggested that maybe these trees could be adopted by the skeletal fingers, Rhinodina. So we were limited to 5 trees, and that was a real shame. I wish we could have translocated onto more trees, and preferably in other valleys, to make sure that the population is safe in case these 5 trees get blown over. Anyways, that's something for the future. First method we used is the one most commonly used for loberia and big leafy lichens, and that's tapling or the garden mesh method. Using stainless steel staples and a bit of garden mesh, we're able to, for the Rhinodina, we scraped off a thin layer of the bark which had the lichen growing out of it, and then we stapled it into position onto the host trees, and then recorded the location of the tree, the aspect that we translocated on, the size of each little sample, and that's how we do the translocation through tapling. The next method is using an artificial substrate. So there is some evidence from Scandinavia suggesting that if you were to just rub the lichen and its isidia and its little bits were to rub onto a tree, there's a chance those little bits will take and grow. But there's a huge chance, like 90% chance, that those little bits will fall off. And if you don't want to actually remove the lichen from your donor tree, in our case, it didn't matter because we knew that the lichen was going to die on the donor tree. But in some cases, your tree is still alive and you don't want to, it's so rare, you don't want to take a bit off of it. So what you can do is take these little minute fractions of the lichen called isidia or cerealia off of that donor tree's lichen. And then you can attach them to a host tree. And so this method is attaching those tiny little bits. And in that close-up photo of the gauze, you can see bright green, little lumpy, little clump that fits. It's in the top left-hand corner of the gauze. So that's one little fragment of the isidia of the Rhinodina lichen. And so what we're doing is we're attaching those little bits to the gauze, and hopefully in the humid and safe climate of the gauze, they'll be able to grow and eventually attach to the tree. So this tree had 40 small 1 by 1 centimeter pieces of gauze attached with stainless steel staples, and the isidia were added to the gauze using a pipette and distilled water. So I scraped off the little bits, carefully scraped off little bits of the lichen off of the donor tree, mixed them in distilled water, and then pipetted them onto the gauze. Apparently, according to one paper which we found, you can get up to 40% of those little isidia surviving. That's better than a 90% loss of isidia if you were to just rub them onto the bark of the tree. So it's another method and less destructive to the host or to the donor tree. Now this method, I'm not sure about yet. It's the super glue method. So we cut off fine pieces, again, of the bark from the donor tree with a knife. And then we shaved an equivalent area on the host trees and super glued those pieces. And then I mark them to be able to relocate them over the next few months and just see whether or not, first question is, will those pieces stay stuck using super glue? So I marked them with little whittled pegs, toothpick kind of pegs. The super glue method would, it seems, it's a preferred method if it works, because we avoid having to introduce staples and plastic onto the host tree. So hopefully this works. My question is, when I was doing the translocation in the dead of winter, the bark was either frozen or very wet or very wet. So whether or not the super glue will hold with the weather long enough is a question. And if you do use this method, you have to make sure that your super glue is pH neutral. So we used Gorilla super glue, which apparently has the right pH. So that's something to consider. Oh, and there was a surprise. So there we are, scraping off little samples of the Rhinodina off of the fallen tree. And in the moss, just a little bit lower, pretty much at ankle level, if the tree had been standing in the moss, was this orange crystal growing. And it turned out to be yet another rare species, yet another protected species, Purina rosei, which is even rarer than Rhinodina isidioides. So while we were translocating the former, we also translocated using the mesh and staples technique. We translocated this Purina on the same host trees. Here's a photo of it. But there was a mistake, as there often is when we are restoring and managing these important places. And this one was heartbreaking. So it was, we had permission to translocate. We did all of that work. I worked with the contractor and the site manager. Everybody was agreed that the tree would be left in place, wouldn't be moved off the footpath. And lo and behold, I arrived in February, and look at that, all of the branches had been cut off. Those huge branches. And then on top of that, they were cut into firewood size and bagged, most of them. I couldn't understand what had happened. And what did happen is something, it's really upsetting, but it's something that probably all of you have come across. And this is the contracting company, very good contracting company, really careful. Remember those first two contractors I met on the first day, they knew about this tree, they knew about the lichens, but they weren't there on this day. It was, a team who didn't have the right supervisor there on site. And the team was working in the river as they were doing, and their machine broke, their winch broke. And then they thought, well, we're here, what should we do? Why don't we just clean it up a little bit? And then they got really happy with their chainsaws, which happens, doesn't it? It happens with your scissors when you're cutting your partner's hair in the bathroom. And it happens with contractors and chainsaws when you leave them to it and nobody says anything. And this is what happened. And it was really, really embarrassing for the manager of the company and very upsetting for us conservationists, but it happened. And so what we need to do is make sure that this firewood is maintained and kept on site. And so we had a site visit, we discussed the options, and we're working on that. But what came out of that was a contractor asking for help. He said, do you think you could train my whole team so that they understand the site better? And so that's something that's resulting out of this incident. We're going to do some training sessions for that contracting company who have lots of contracts in the area as well as others. So next steps, retain the deadwood always. And we need to continue training, because some of you, many of you have probably been on a deadwood course. You might have provided that training opportunity for others. And then those people move on and life moves on and we forget. We always forget. And so we need to continue offering these training and these reminders to everybody. And it's all of us have made mistakes, and we've all seen mistakes happening. And we have to be very honest about that, but we have to keep on learning and reminding ourselves of that. So more training on deadwood especially. But also look, these two main trees which you see in the photograph, these are two of the host trees. And look at them. They're surrounded by young oak, mostly. So we need to halo thin these trees because they need more light for the lichens. So there's the usual halo thinning of important lichen trees. And then this training, so site-specific training, but also now I'm working on something I think I would like to offer to all conservation contractors in Eryri to start off with. Some sort of a workshop on death of a tree. I thought the title could be Death of a Tree, new science and conservation advice about management of dying and dead trees. You know, there's a lot has come out since the 90s, the early 2000s about transfer of nutrients and resources between dying trees and the surrounding trees. There's just so much we should be sharing with people and contractors in particular, so that instead of them just seeing a tree they need to tidy up, they understand the bigger story. So that's something I'll be working on in the next year. And this is a positive. The same contractors came back with some volunteers, halo thinned, and identified a few legacy oaks for 300 years down the line. And that's it. That's my story.